CPS workers, what's your worst experience on the job? A report came through about a stepfather who was mistreating his children. When I interviewed the eldest kid with the police, she had very visible injuries and told me exactly what had happened. The dad was a monster who laid hands on them all the time, even in their sleep. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid, I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said if we were outside this building right now I would effing unalive you. We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day we had court for the children and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who attended told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that beach of a worker who took my kids?" I felt scared, but mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second just looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness I started hearing tiny rustling noises. Safe to say I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come and pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around and with the headlights shining on my car I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She'd organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then about a week later a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I was convinced it was this same man. Over the next few weeks letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as Beach and Home Wrecker, saying that I mistreat children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The letters talked about roping me, unaliving me. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they'd been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day on the way home from work I noticed that a car was following me. At first I thought I was being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets, double-backed onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. Even after all that, a dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out but had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic I'd forgotten to get the license plate. That upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was very honestly ready to quit, but then the vid happened. It really changed everything. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family.